Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study class for the Torah portion of Matos and Masei, a double portion. We begin with a brief overview of Matos and Masei. Moshe conveys the laws governing the annulment of vows to the heads of the tribes of Israel. War is waged against Midian for their role in plotting the moral destruction of Israel, and the Torah gives a detailed account of the war spoils and how they were allocated among the people, the warriors, the Levites, and the high priest. The tribes of Reuben and Gad, later joined by half of the tribe of Manasseh, asked for the lands east of the Jordan as their portion in the Promised Land, these being prime pasture land for their cattle. Moshe is initially angered by the request, but subsequently agrees on the condition that they first join and lead in Israel's conquest of the lands west of the Jordan. The 42 journeys and encampments of Israel are listed from the Exodus to their encampment on the plains of Moab across the river from the land of Canaan. Also in Masei, the boundaries of the Promised Land are given, and cities of refuge are designated as havens and places of exile for inadvertent murderers. The daughters of Tzalafchad marry within their own tribe of Manasseh, so that the estate that they inherit from their father should not pass to another tribe. So on to the Parsha. One of the titles that the Jewish people are given is that of the chosen people. When people hear this title, it often causes a reaction within people. There are absolutely some Gentiles, some people who are not Jewish, who are very offended by this idea that anybody can view themselves as being the chosen people. And they will say this is a racist idea. Are you part of some type of elitist group that you think you're better than other people? But I've heard this claim not just from people who are not Jewish, but from Jewish people as well. They're uncomfortable. They do not like this idea of a chosen nation. And there are even some streams within Judaism that in fact reject this title and have eliminated this concept from their view and perspective on the Jewish people. Now, where did it come from? Where does this notion come from? One of the sources is actually in our davening that we recite every single day as part of the blessings before Shema. You have chosen us from all other nations and tongues. You, our King, have brought us close to your great name with love. So you cannot avoid the issue, although you might not like the issue. The idea that the Jewish people are a chosen people is absolutely 100% part of authentic Jewish tradition. Being that's the case, what exactly are we supposed to do with this information? What does this mean to us? How should we live our life differently? How do we respond to people who challenge us with this issue? What do we do with it? The first thing I have to say is that the idea that the Jewish people are the chosen nation is absolutely a positive statement about the Jewish people, but in no way, shape, or form can it be interpreted as a negative statement against anyone who is not Jewish. What does the Torah teach about people who are not Jewish? Number one, every human being is created in the image of God, is a partner with God in creation, in fulfilling the purpose and the reason for the world being created, can have a close personal relationship with God, is eligible for heaven, and is considered to be precious and beloved by God. So the fact that the Jewish people are called the chosen people is a statement about the role and responsibility and the duties of the Jewish people. It can in no way be interpreted as derogatory to Gentiles who are absolutely precious in the eyes of God, created in the image of God, and receive their reward, and so on and so forth. The Jewish people are chosen, and there are responsibilities and obligations that go with that. But it's not just the Jewish people that were chosen. The land of Israel was also chosen. The land of Israel, of course, is known as the Promised Land, right? This is the land that God promised to the Jewish people, that God chose to be the home of the Jewish people. This is one of the ideas that is mentioned in this week's Torah portion of Matos and Masei. You shall clear out the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to occupy it. And in this week's Torah portion, we have some of the division of the land itself to the Jewish people. The land of Israel plays an absolutely central role within Judaism, so much so that there's a medrash that actually says, if a person lives in the land of Israel, it is as if they have fulfilled and observed all 613 mitzvahs. Israel is like connected to and compared to the entirety of Torah. That's how precious and that's how valuable it is. In Hebrew, how do we say the land of Israel? It is called Eretz Yisrael, like the term which is used throughout the Torah. Yet in this week's Torah portion, when the Torah describes how the Jewish people will enter and inherit the land of Israel, we find something unusual. The Torah does not say Eretz Yisrael. The Torah says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan. Why would the Torah refer to the land of Israel by the land of Canaan? It's one thing if we're talking about 300, 400, 500 years before the Jews entered into the land, before it had any real relationship or connection with the Jewish people. But we're talking about the Jewish people entering, conquering the territory. It would make much more sense to say Eretz Yisrael. Why does it say the land of Canaan? So question number one for tonight's class. If the unique Jewish quality of the land is represented in the name Eretz Yisrael, why does the Torah use the name the land of Canaan in our parsha? So to explain this, we have to appreciate what is it that actually makes Israel special. There are two elements, two factors that we're going to talk about tonight about what makes Israel special. Element number one is it is special because God chose it. It's God's favorite. He chose it. He selected it. What is special about Israel? It is the fact that God chose this land to be the homeland for the Jewish people. The second element is a direct result of the fact that God chose it. Because of the fact that God chose it, as a result of God's choice, Israel is holier than any other place. What do we mean that Israel is holier than any other place? There's so much that we could get into, but first of all, on a very practical level, there are more mitzvahs that we can do there than anywhere else in the world. More than a half of all of the 613 mitzvahs can only be applied, can only be practiced in the land of Israel. So automatically, Israel is the holiest place. It's the place where we could have the most deep, the most real, the most solid connection to Hashem by performing the most amount of mitzvahs. Our sages assert that there's something in the air of Israel. There's a spiritual sensitivity that a person experiences in the land of Israel. You can tangibly experience and sense the presence of God. There's a divine providence that you see in the land of Israel that you don't see anywhere else. In addition to that, they say, the quality of the Torah study in the land of Israel is on a whole nother level. What you could accomplish studying Torah in Israel, incomparable than what you could accomplish studying the same amount of time, the same amount of hours outside the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is a holy place. The Rebbe commented, quite interestingly, that these two ideas, the idea that the land of Israel is special because God chose it, and that the land of Israel is special because it is holy, are related to the two names, Eretz Yisrael and Eretz Canaan. What do I mean by that? We said Israel is special because God chose it. Israel is special because its inherent sanctity. Which of these two names reflect the fact that Israel is holy? The Rebbe says the land of Israel. When you hear the land of Canaan, it does not exactly inspire you to sanctity or to holiness, rather the land of Israel. Why? Because it is the Jewish people in the land of Israel observing Torah and mitzvahs connect to Hashem and make the land a holy land. So the name Eretz Yisrael is connected to the idea that the land of Israel is holy. What about the fact that God chose the land? This can even apply to the land of Canaan, because the name is irrelevant to the fact that God chose it or did not choose it. The land is chosen, whatever name you call it. By any name you call it, the land of Israel is still the chosen land. So the answer to the first question, why does the Torah use the name, the land of Canaan, in our Parsha? God chose the land at the beginning of time, when it was still called Canaan. To evoke that special chosenness, the name Canaan is sometimes used. So the Torah is trying to emphasize that the land of Israel was chosen by God to be the homeland for the Jewish people, no matter what you call it. You can call it Canaan, you could call it Palestine, you could call it Detroit. It doesn't matter what you call it. At the end of the day, God chose the land of Israel. It has nothing to do with holiness, it has nothing to do with behavior, it has nothing to do with Torah and mitzvahs. God chose that land, and therefore it is special and is unique, no matter the name, Canaan, Palestine, Detroit, etc. Any name you call it, it has this special element of being the promised land, being the chosen land, and being our land. Now, understanding this idea that there's something called the chosenness of the land of Israel, and there's something called the holiness of the land of Israel, we can now get back to our original question. Our original question is, what do we do with this concept of a chosen people? So let's try to break this down a little bit. There are two elements to Jewishness. There's the idea of the holiness of the Jew, and then there's the idea of the chosenness of the Jew. Now, what is the concept of the holiness of a Jew? Holiness is primarily about what you do. A person may act and behave in a holy way, in a holy manner, so you would point to that person and say, oh, that's a holy Jew. The person is leading a religious life, dedicated to Torah, dedicated to mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs are a reflection and an expression of holiness. They are not an expression of chosenness. Chosenness is something different. Now, what do I mean by that? When God sought a nation that was going to observe his Torah and mitzvahs and reflect holiness, he did not only ask the Jewish people. The Medrash says that God went around to every single nation and asked them, do you want my Torah? They said, what's in it? God told them what's in it, and they said, no, thank you. How did the Jewish people get the Torah? Very simple. We said yes. We were the only people who said yes. So our observance of Torah and mitzvahs is a reflection of the fact that we said yes, and therefore there's holiness, there's spirituality in our life, but it has nothing to do with chosenness. Like, chosenness is something which is totally different. What is the idea of a choice about? A choice is only relevant when a person has two things that are equal in front of them. There is no advantage in one over the other. There's not one of them that is pushing you or propelling you into making that choice. And yet you choose that item. For example, a person could have two equal apples in front of you. If you choose one, that means you freely chose it. But if there's an apple in front of you and an orange in front of you, and you dislike oranges, you will refuse to eat an orange, then you cannot really say you chose the apple because there was essentially only one choice. True choice is only possible when there's an equivalence between the two items in question. In such a situation, the person exercises his or her objective discretion and chooses one of the items. Accordingly, due to the sanctity of Torah and mitzvahs, the Jewish people and their non-Jewish counterparts lack equivalency, and so true choice is impossible. We are compelled to say that when God chose the Jewish people, it had nothing to do with their sanctity. Rather, to the contrary, it is his choice that introduced the sanctity to begin with. In clearer language, The relationship a Jew enjoys with God as a result of this choice is from God's very core, connecting with the core of a Jew. The relationship that is created due to a Jew's sanctity, namely through Torah and mitzvahs that are the will and desire of God, doesn't connect the Jew's core with God. Rather, it's connection that is predicated on something, Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, the connection that we have with God based on Torah and mitzvahs is limited. It's limited to the Torah and mitzvahs that it's based on. However, the connection that we have with God from the fact that God chose us is defined by our very essence and is not limited to any external factor on any level. Okay? Now, these two principles, the Jew's connection with Hashem, can either be one, a product of our relationship created through a religious lifestyle, or it is a product of God's unilateral and objective choice. If our relationship with God is based on a product of a relationship created through a religious lifestyle, you know what that means? You're only in if you follow the laws, right? You're only in if you follow the laws. However, if your relationship and connection to God is a product of God's unilateral and objective choice, you know what that means? It means there's nothing you can do that can push you out, right? God chose you. You're always in. Now, how do we express this chosen status? We understand how you express the relationship that's based on Torah mitzvahs. You do Torah mitzvahs, right? Simple as that. How do we express the concept that we are chosen by God? Right? It's not mitzvahs. Mitzvahs is a different thing, right? Mitzvahs is a separate element of our relationship with God. The fact that we were chosen by God and therefore ultimately are the chosen people, what does that mean? This has to do with our core identity, who we really are on the deepest possible level. Now, what do I mean by that, right? What's a core identity? So the story is told of a very wealthy Jew who very much was upset and offended and bothered by the fact that he was Jewish, and did everything in his power to hide and conceal and to minimize his Jewish identity, to the extent that he actually converted to Christianity. This Jew who converted to Christianity had a good friend who was a hunchback, had a massive hunchback on his back, leaned, he was hunched over, bent over, big hunchback on his back. So one day, this Jew who converted to Christianity and the hunchback are walking down the street, and they pass a shul. And the Jew who converted says to the hunchback, I used to be a Jew. And you know what the hunchback says, Avi? The hunchback says, oh yeah? And I used to be a hunchback. Okay? What does that mean? There is nothing that a Jew can do to change and to alter his connection to Hashem. Yes, there's an element of Torah and mitzvahs. You can upgrade your Torah and mitzvahs. You can downgrade your Torah and mitzvahs. On that front, there could be issues. But when it comes to your core identity, when it comes to who you are, God chose you. It's not up to you. It has nothing to do with your talents, skills, and ability. God chose you, and you are absolutely in. Right? The Rebbe explains, when God chose the people at the giving of the Torah, it was a unilateral choice from the very core of the chooser. This influenced the relationship between God and the Jewish people for long after that time, creating a connection not only by dint of what a Jew does, but embedded with his or her very identity. At the giving of the Torah, the Jews thus became servants. A servant doesn't naturally want to carry out his master's wishes. Rather, a Jew is entirely indentured to God at his or her very core, leaving all other elements behind. A Jew's entire identity is bound up with his or her creator. What this means again is you are chosen. Even if you don't want it, absolutely, this is you. Our chosenness is clear when we keep doing our job, even when it's difficult. The only plausible explanation for this behavior is that it is our very identity, it is our very core, it is absolutely who we are. It's not about what we want. We were chosen for this, right? This is who we are. This is our identity. And you shall be to me a kingdom of princes, the Sepharna writes. You will be a treasure to me in the sense that you will be a kingdom of priests to guide and to teach the entire human race, to invoke God's name and to worship him shoulder to shoulder. What does it mean, right, to be chosen by God? It means that we are chosen to live by example, to teach to the world monotheism, to teach the world morality, to teach the world what it means to have a family life, to teach the world that the world is created for a reason, there is a purpose to life, there's meaning to every single moment, to teach and to demonstrate to the world that God needs each and every one of us. To be the chosen nation is not about ego, it's not about power, it's not about supremacy at all. In fact, you had no choice in the matter. But you had no choice. God chose you. For what purpose and for what mission? To be a light unto the nations. This is a very famous letter from John Adams, second president of the United States. He says, I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that chance had ordered the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist who believed that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance has ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilizations. Another non-Jew, famous historian, Paul Johnson. One way of summing up 4,000 years of Jewish history is to ask ourselves, what would have happened to the human race if Abram had not been a man of great sagacity? If he had stayed in Ur and kept his higher notions to himself, and no specific Jewish people had come into being, certainly the world without the Jews would have been a radically different place. All the great conceptual discoveries of the intellect seem obvious and inescapable once they've been revealed, but it requires a special genius to formulate them for the first time. The Jew has this gift. To them we owe both the idea of equality before the law, both divine and human, of the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person, of the individual conscious and so of personal redemption, of the collective conscious and so of social responsibility, of peace as an abstract ideal, and love as the foundation of justice, and many other items which constitute the basic moral furniture of the human mind. Without the Jews, it might have been a much emptier place. Let's go back for a second. Now, anyone who's seen Fiddler on the Roof knows the famous line of Tevye, right? What does Tevye say? I know, we're the chosen people, but once in a while, God, right? Maybe you want to choose someone else, right? There's a long history to that expression, to the emotion that Tevye was trying to convey. As a result of this notion and idea of being the chosen nation, the Jews have suffered greatly. However, that should not happen. Why should that not happen? Number one, being a chosen nation does not, should not, and cannot lead to ego or a feeling of supremacy. Why? Because the more we embrace our chosenness, the more humble, kind, and compassionate we will become. Because we were chosen to serve, right? That's what we were chosen for. So when the Jewish people truly embraced the idea of being a chosen nation, no supremacy, no ego, not at all. It's not racism, it's not elitism. The more we embrace our chosenness, the more humble, kind, and compassionate we will become. And ultimately, right, what is the most important thing to remember of this whole idea of being chosen? What does being chosen mean? It means the critical and important role that we play within the purpose of creation. Reflect on what John Adams says, right? Reflect on what Paul Johnson says. The contribution that the Jewish people have made to the world simply by being a light unto the nation, while at the same time we were running away and hiding for our lives, right? Being persecuted, killed, exiled, pogrom, Holocaust, etc. Yet look at the impact that we made on the world. How did we do so? By living as proud Jews, no matter the circumstance, no matter the situation. And that is ultimately what it means to be the chosen nation. Now we got 4 questions to wrap up the class. Question number 1, what did we study today? We studied the concept of being a chosen nation. What does being the chosen nation mean? God chose us. We can't get out of it. It is our identity. It's who we are. It means that we have a tremendous responsibility and a very important responsibility. Question number 2, can you imagine what your life would look like if you truly internalized and appreciated the importance of what it means to be a chosen nation? If we reflect upon history and we recognize the colossal impact that the Jewish people have had on the world simply by behaving, by living and acting the way Jews are meant to be. If I truly valued how important it was, how necessary it was, how needed it is for each and every one of us to live as proud Jews, if I realized how important that was, how would my life look different? My weekends, my lunch table, my family life, how would that look different? Question number 3, what is stopping you? What is holding you back from living this way? Perhaps you're not fully, you've never really spent the time to wrap your head around what it means to be chosen, what is important. Perhaps you're not familiar with how to do it practically, right? What is the obstacle that prevents me from living this way? And of course, question number 4, what is something that I can do today before I go to sleep that gets me a little bit closer to that goal? What is one real practical thing that I could do that will advance me and get me one step closer? Any questions, comments, thoughts before we wrap up? If not, next week, Thursday, 7:30 p.m., 30 minutes of Torah study. And I also want to point out that on Monday night begins my 41st birthday. So at my house at about 7 o'clock, we'll have some sushi, little l'chaim, nothing crazy and formal, but if you're around, I'd love to have you stop by, have a l'chaim, have a bite of sushi. We'll bring a little bit in honor of my birthday. So that's this Thursday night, on Monday night at 7 p.m. All right. Thoughts, questions, comments, arguments?
No.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Thank
fabulous
you.
evening and a wonderful Shabbos. And we have a fabulous Kiddush and Shul Shabbos sponsored by the Lintons. Yosef and Anna and various grandchildren will be there. Noach and I don't know if his baby will be in Shul, but Noach, Chaya are going to be there, I believe. So it'll be a beautiful Shabbos and Shul, and I hope to see you all there. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Take care.